Thank you, Dominic. Thanks for having me again. Hi, everybody. We're going to take a look at the chapters 29 to 42, and I tried to put together a PowerPoint to keep myself organized and together. And if I can share it with you, it would be great. Is this working? Can you guys see okay? And I put in illustrations, and I tried to get some of the presenters have come up with great quotes to try to help with the themes, and also I tried to do that too. The overview of the whole little presentation here, I'm going to try to get together a plot summary and show relationships and things that are happening, and then a short little recap of themes, and then some questions that you can take into the discussion afterwards. So for plot summary, in terms of structure, there's like three pieces I found in these chapters, two of which are sort of reflections of each other, which I'm sure you guys have seen all through. We have the two houses, the outhouses and the Stansbury's place, where we have similar relationships going on. You've got the hosting party, the guests, which with the outhouses is Emily and Nora, and with Miss Stansbury, it's Dorothy really, but Priscilla is her correspondent. And then in each setting, we've also got two suitors for, we have Hugh and Mr. Glasscock for Nora, and Brooke and Mr. Gibson for Dorothy. The third missing piece of that structure, not structure, but the third missing thread of the plot for this is the Alps trip with Trevelyan and Glasscock. So we'll get to that a little bit later. I'll run through the chapters real quickly and just try to give you like a quick review and a quote. In 29, the outhouses, we meet the outhouses. It's a dreary place, they say. They're good people, but they're under some stresses, financial and otherwise. And the great quote that ends the chapter is, "Mother," said Priscilla, as soon as the parlor door was shut, when the two ladies are leaving and going to the outhouses' house, and the two are alone together, "we must take care that we never are brought again into such a mistake as that. They who protect the injured should be strong themselves." And that is Priscilla speaking, but it's kind of a comment on the outhouses that she's not even aware of that she's saying that. I think poor Mr. and Mrs. Outhouse are not strong enough to take on this responsibility, which they're going to find out later. And Dorothy makes up her mind. She makes her decision. The chapter starts off with some gossip. There's talk of Brooke Burgess coming. There's a lot of excitement about that. There's the planning of the party. And the decision that Dorothy makes is the decision about accepting Mr. Gibson or not. When she's speaking with her sister, the quote is, "It is a brighter prospect, dear Dolly," says Priscilla, "than to live either with us at Nuncombe or with Aunt Stanbury as her niece, like if you accept Mr. Gibson." But then Dorothy says, "But if I don't love him, Priscilla," and Priscilla says, "Then give it up and be as you are, my own dearest sister." "And so I will," said Dorothy. And at that time, her mind was made up. So Dorothy makes up her mind. She makes up her mind to not give in to convenience and to err on the side of love. Chapter 33, we meet Mr. Brooke Burgess, and a great character. He's kind of a charming, happy-go-lucky guy. I think Miss Stanhope calls him a Merry Andrew. And then we get the scene at the party where he really brings life to the whole place. And they have Mr. Gibson at one end and Brooke at the other, which is a nice kind of geographical setup of the two, what will become, I think, rivals. You see Dorothy get kind of cornered and almost imprisoned by, not imprisoned, that's too strong, but cornered by Mr. Gibson, and she's seeing the delight and liveliness of Brooke across the room and the kind of lifelessness of Mr. Gibson, and starts to realize that this is, the contrast is very strong. Chapter 33, Hugh Stanbury smokes another pipe. We've seen him smoke two pipes before, and each time he does a lot of thinking, smoking and thinking. He says he would do, I'm sorry. He decides at this point that he's going to err on the side of love himself and go back and has the decision. Did I skip a thing here? I might have. I'm sorry. On chapter 32, the full moon at St. Didolf's, I probably did skip one. Chapter 32, Hugh helps Trevelyan have a visit with his son. and the full moon is the pub down the street. But after that, he decides that Trevelyan is completely wrong. Trevelyan has missed it, and he says that he can't help with this anymore. At one point, he is talking with Mr. Outhouse, I believe. Mr. Trevelyan is so unreasonable man, so much like a madman indeed, that I hardly know how to look forward to any future happiness for my niece, said Mr. Outhouse. This was spoken with the utmost severity that Mr. Outhouse could assume. And yet, Trevelyan says, no man loves his wife more tenderly. And Outhouse says, tender love should show itself by tender conduct, Mr. Stanbury. And that idea of tender conduct is something that Trevelyan is not showing. And now we come to chapter 33, where Hugh smokes his pipe and decides he's going to take the chance. He says, I don't make enough money to really make Dorothy happy, but maybe that's her decision to make. I got to at least give her the opportunity. And he decides he's going to go and do it. The great internal argument about love. Our friend Hugh, when he sat smoking on the knife board of the omnibus, determined he would risk everything. There's another little section of this chapter 2 where we find out what's going on with Basil and Trevelyan. Trevelyan realizes he's completely isolated now. Hugh has cut him off, everybody's cut him off, and he, Trevelyan, could not live without Basil's assistance. And we see Trevelyan becoming more and more isolated, more and more dependent on Basil, who is not really a reliable helper for him. He's not really a reliable friend. Priscilla's wisdom in chapter 34 is really an epistolatory chapter. There are letters going back and forth between the two sisters, where Dorothy writes to Priscilla and says, you know, I've got the situation, what should I do? And Priscilla says, if you find that you love him, then say that you'll be his wife. And if your heart revolts from such a declaration as being false, if you cannot bring yourself to feel that you prefer him to others as the partner of your life, then tell him with thanks for his courtesy that it cannot be as he would have it. And Priscilla really, the letter just clarifies everything. The language just makes the decision so clear that Dorothy's in her debt and realizes again that her path is clear before her. Chapter 35, Mr. Gibson's good fortune. We have an interesting chapter here. This is where we meet the French girls, the French sisters. Brooke talks with Uncle Barty at the bank. We have a couple of conversations going on at the beginning. Brooke talks with Uncle Barty at the bank, and I forgot what the cause of the problem was. It seems that if this helps, Miss Stanbury was once betrothed to Barty's brother, to Brooke's father or uncle, I'm not sure, to one of the Burgesses, but the engagement was broken off. But even so, when Mr. Burgess died, he left everything to her, even though she had never gone through with the marriage. And so that's why the Burgesses are so upset about it. But Miss Stanbury's decided that even though that was his generosity was wonderful, that the money should go back to the Burgess when she dies. So that's why it's going to Brooke. Brooke talks with Uncle Barty at the bank, and he talks with Miss Stansbury about the will, and they discuss the background. Mr. Gibson and the French girls, Mr. Gibson and Hugh go and visit the French girls, and we see that I think Arabella especially is very, very keen on Mr. Gibson and is kind of maneuvers him or manipulates him to try to find out, well, what's going on with you and this other woman. And he's saying, well, no, I'm still free. I'm still free. And the chapter ends with, we see Brooke, who is really a self-aware character, very comfortable in himself, saying to Mr. Gibson, you know, it's a shame you can't marry both of them. And Mr. Gibson goes, that would be bigamy. And Brooke says, just so. And kind of hinting at him that, you know, you're kind of, you know, showing interest in both of them. You know, what are you going to do about this? This doesn't seem to be a very honest way of dealing with things. Miss Stanbury's wrath. This is the chapter where Mr. Gibson comes to make his proposal and Dorothy won't come down. Dorothy is a no-show. And Miss Stanbury is honest with Mr. Gibson and says, you've given them some excuse, you know, meaning people who gossip about his flirtations with the French girls. And Miss Stanbury and Dorothy do what the others, Miss Stanbury gets really angry with Dorothy for not coming down. But what happens is they talk it out. they work it out. Dorothy was like quilting a cap for Miss Stanbury, and at the end, and Miss Stanbury said, "I don't want your cap, you know, I don't want you obviously don't." But by working it out, they get to a point where they compromise and they look at each other's point of view. And the chapter ends with Dorothy going back and saying, "No, I guess I will stay here," and she goes back to quilting the cap. And we don't see that with the other characters. We don't see that with Trevelyan and Emily. We see these two women, though, actually showing through their example what it's like to honestly get angry with each other and honestly love each other and make it up and realize that whatever it is that's separating us right now isn't as important as us being together in our relationship. Miss Stansbury, they compromise and Dorothy continues quilting the cap. Chapter 37, we're going to get there, there it is Monsenus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which I have to admit I didn't have a real clear picture in my mind of what was going on. Trevelyan and Mr. Glasscock are in a coach. Apparently there's a coach from St. Michael's in, I think, the south of France to Monsenus, and the travel takes them to northern Italy across the Alps. And at the time that Trollope was writing this, I have the ideas here. They're at a time earlier on when they had what were called diligences, which were coaches. And the coaches would take this journey. The picture is there from just a Wikipedia illustration. And they were going to build a tunnel to get them and make it a much quicker trip. And while they were building the tunnel, they had a railway going. And the tunnel was finished so much more quickly that the railway was only needed from 1868 to 1871. So we're in the coaches period here. I guess they're working on the railway and the tunnel is in the future. One other thing about Monsenus is that it translates as the Mountain of Ashes, which reminded me a little bit of, if you know The Great Gatsby, the Valley of Ashes, that kind of wasteland image. Mr. Glasscock and Mr. Trevelyan meet two American women on the coaches going from St. Michael to Monsenus in northern Italy, the Spalding ladies. And there's this wonderful discussion of American women versus European women. And Trevelyan says he doesn't like American women. They lack the weakness that a woman ought to have, which leads to a faux pas by Mr. Glasscock when he says, well, you know, we're accustomed to less self-assertion on the part of women than is customary. We prefer women to rule us by seeming to yield. And when he makes the thing that, well, you know, we still haven't had women leaving us yet. And of course, the separation with Emily and Trevelyan is a sad subject. The truth is that when one is absolutely unhappy, one cannot revel in the imagination. I don't believe in the miseries of the poets, says Trevelyan. And I think myself, said Glasscock, very utilitarianly, that a poet should have a good digestion. So you see the contrast between these two men, one who they're both brokenhearted in a way, but Glasscock's not letting it get to him, and Trevelyan can't get out of his own self-pity and his own misery. Then we have this interesting chapter 38, the verdict of the jury, mad, my lord. And we've had one mention of madness already, and now Trollope really goes into what madness is like. And he talks about a hidden madness, that you can have madness where the person thinks they're a teapot, he says, and that's obvious to everyone. But then you can have another type of madness where the person can go through their life and make their decisions and do their work, but they're really going crazy on the inside. And this chapter also mentions Basil's influence, that Trevelyan's only contact, his only communication is through Basil, and Basil has his own agenda. It's in his benefit to make sure that Trevelyan does not trust Emily. So, like, for example, I think there was a letter, Emily sends a letter to say, you know, I don't want Colonel Osborne seeing me anymore, writing to me. And instead of saying, oh, you know, Trevelyan saying, well, this is a great thing, this is exactly what I was hoping for, Basil tells him, oh, they always say that. They always write a letter like that. There's another one that's hidden that you don't get to see. So you see Basil's manipulation of Trevelyan and spinning him down and further into a kind of madness. I might be too far off on this, but it seemed almost Iago. It's not really like Iago and Othello. The Othello thing, the jealousy thing is there. But Iago seemed to have a purpose to it, or an anger or a hatred. And Basil's just kind of He's in it for himself. So that whole madness chapter is very interesting. And at the end, Hugh has a resolution to go to St. Didos to propose to Nora, and but he needs an excuse. His excuse is he's got Basil's address, and there's a letter from Emily's father that they want to get to Trevelyan, and Hugh figures I can offer my services and get to see Nora at the same time. Chapter 39, Miss Nora Rawley is maltreated. This is where an interesting angle where you've got dual emotions going on. Miss Nora is maltreated, but the maltreater is Hugh. And he comes in because he wants to make this proposal, and he makes it, I think the phrase was, not as gently as might be wished. He's a little bit rough about it, and he's trying to make his thing. She's kind of resisting him. And he's saying, this is my chance. He almost literally throws Emily out of the room, saying, you know, yeah, I want you to leave, please. I need a couple of minutes. And but during the encounter, he ends up holding Nora by the arms and getting his arm around her waist. And she hasn't accepted him, but he feels like things are going in a direction where she hasn't rejected him either. CG, chapter 40, we go back and we're back with the American ladies, the Spalding ladies, and they meet their American relatives. And there's the Spalding party. There's an uncle who's an American minister, a cousin who's the American Secretary of Legation. There's 3 or 4 friends and relations. They're all there. And they're chatting and talking about these 2 interesting Englishmen that they met on the coaches. And while they're talking about it, they're speculating about lords and mad doctors, that Trevelyan seemed like the mad doctor, and said, not right to say that. And then all of a sudden, they're speculating about who this CG was. He had CG on his suitcases and all. And then who appears, but CG himself, and he's introduced, and they all get to say hello, and then all of a sudden he's accepted. The next chapter, 41, showing what took place at St. Didos. St. Didos is where Emily and Dorothy are with the outhouses. After she had, this is where, I'm sorry, Nora has, it doesn't know what to do, because she's been kind of proposed to, and she thinks it's wrong. The quote is, after she had sobbed upon the bed, she got up and walked around the room smiling. And she would now press her hands to her forehead, and then shake her tresses, and then clasp her own left hand with her right, as though he were still holding it. Wicked man, why had he been so wicked and so violent? And why had she not once felt his lips upon her brow? There's this interesting mix of reactions where she's angry at maybe the way, the non-genteel way that she was proposed to, but she's delighted that this thing is going to happen. Maybe one more disturbing thing that happens in St. Didos is Colonel Osborne comes, and it's not, he says he's not really coming for a visit, although he does try to see Emily's sister. He's really almost thrown out of the house. You know, the pastor says, no, this is not acceptable. You're not going to be allowed in here, and gets him out quickly. And then finally, in chapter 42, our last chapter for today, Miss Stanbury and Mr. Gibson become 2. This is where Mr. Gibson comes back and decides he's going to make his big proposal to Dorothy. They get her down there, and he goes to do it, and she says, no, I can't, it's just impossible. I don't have the feelings, And Miss Stanbury has a scene with Brooke, and then Miss Stanbury has a talk with Dorothy. We have the scene with Mr. Gibson and Dorothy, where he tries to make a second proposal. And Mr. Gibson and Miss Stanbury have it out. Miss Stanbury is as honest as you could ask for. You know where she stands. And she says, you really messed this up. And he says, you can't believe it. He said, yes, you did. You think I don't understand? Haven't I eyes in my head? This is Miss Stanbury to Mr. Gibson. I'm not deaf yet, nor blind, but there's an end of it. If any young woman ever meant anything, she means it. The truth is, she don't like you. And he says, well, I think you forget yourself. And Miss Stanbury says, Heidi, tighty, said Miss Stanbury, forgetting myself, I shan't forget you in a hurry, Mr. Gibson. And out he goes. So her scene with him is wonderful. I think an interesting thing in this chapter too to do is to contrast Mr. Gibson's eloquent but insincere proposal with Hugh's ungentle but very sincere one. And it goes back to that reflection thing that was on that first slide, where you see two suitors in two very different ways. And Mr. Gibson is very eloquent. Like his stuff could, his language is as good as you could ask for, but his heart is not. He's not as good a heart, I think, as Hugh is. To talk about the themes for just a minute, I tried to break them down into psychological level and social level. On the psychological themes, we've got the beginnings of this question of madness and Trevelyan slowly going mad. And I think Trollope is really wonderful at this. It's almost like a clockwork where you can see the cogs turning like moment by moment, incident by incident. Like it starts out where things seem not to be as big a deal as they become, but almost like the gears keep turning one by one, and he keeps getting more and more alienated, more and more alone. Basil becomes more and more manipulated, and I think poor Trevelyan is going mad if he's not there already. And the madness that gets it all going is his jealousy, and his jealousy is based on ego and self-deceit. There's an ego to this, and I think Emily has it too. Their sense of well, with Trevelyan it's self-pity, and with Emily it's what she deserves and what she should put up with and what she can't. So that type of pride on both sides is what really creates the separation. And in Trevelyan's part, it's the thing that gets the clockwork going and starting that way. On the social themes, one of the things I wanted to look at was the title word right, when they say he knew he was right. And you get that question, well, there's a lot of things that right can mean. First of all, it might be ethics, right and wrong. Is it right to do this? Is it right to do that? That's one question. A second one is power. Like Trevelyan's always talking about, I have the right because I'm the husband. I deserve this kind of subjugation by my wife. She owes me this because I want her. I think at one point he says, I'm giving her this and I'm giving her that and I'm providing all this, and all I want from her is for me to be her all in all, which is just everything there is, And he's got this sense that it's his. It's almost like it's his legal right, and that's another definition of right. And the third one is the idea of truth or correctness. Right perception, I guess you might call it, seeing things right. And I think with I don't think this was in these chapters, but one character where you see it really working beautifully, two characters are Miss Stanbury and Priscilla. When Miss Stanbury had it wrong that Colonel Osborne went to visit Emily, and she found out, oh no, that didn't happen. She immediately wrote a letter and said, I was wrong. I apologize. I'm so sorry. She was able to say that she wasn't right. And when Colonel Osborne did come, Priscilla was able to, it wasn't easy, but she was able to write a letter to her aunt saying, listen, he did come, and it wasn't our fault, but, you had a right to be suspicious. And that idea that the two of them could not let their pride bend their perception of what's right and what really happened, their perception of the truth. Trevelyan can't do that. He was always bending his perception of the truth. And now he's got Basil bending it for him. So, finally we get to the questions. I tried to come up with a couple that I thought played with some of the ideas we just talked about, and you can come up with your own if you don't like these. But one of the things was obstinacy or stubbornness. And all of these characters are on like a scale or a continuum of being obstinate. You've got, of course, Trevelyan and Emily at one end, and there are people that are very, easygoing and whatever you want at the other. And then there's people that are right in the middle who have a kind of balance between being willing to go along and also being able to stand up for themselves. And you can play with where the different characters fit on that continuum or that scale. Second thing to think about is comparing and contrasting Hugh's proposal to Nora with Mr. Gibson's proposal to Dorothy in terms of sincerity and eloquence, the way as we talked about. And that ties into ideas about truth and and love and selfishness, and and other ways that different characters, those reflections idea, how different characters reflect each other and show contrast that way, and what that means. Third idea I was thinking of is the battle between Trevelyan and Emily. You can start thinking about who's the most to blame and maybe who suffers the most. Not to get into the male-female gender battle of it, but almost a psychological battle. Was there one who could have given in more at a different time and didn't? And the poor child too, who gets caught in between. And the fourth thing I thought of was which characters bend the truth to fit their own ends and which respect the truth even when it's inconvenient for them. So the last time I did this, I think I ran way over. So I practiced this a couple times to try to keep it under 20 minutes, and I might even be a little bit short. I hope that's helpful, and I hope that you guys have a great discussion with it.